welcome to the 29th Annual Seattle Hempfest, everyone. It is my great privilege and pleasure to be moderating the panel for Hemp and Regenerative Agriculture, How to Heal the Soil While Healing the World. I'm Joy Beckerman, Principal of Hemp ACE International and Vice President of Law and Science of the U.S. Hemp Roundtable, and I am so happy that we have an all-star panel to deliver to you today. We've got Jeff Kostuk of Hemp Production Services, Director of Operations almost throughout the entire globe, and who has been involved with hemp research in the state, in the country of Canada, since it began to be a regulated crop in 1998 and started out as a soil technician for the government of Manitoba 10 years before that. We also have Ms. Tonia Farman, CEO of Queen of Hearts Hemp and Hemp Northwest, to share with us some of the more commercial and marketing issues and educational needs around educating consumers, retailers, distributors, wholesalers about regenerative agriculture and how it dovetails with hemp and how we can create a better product and a better planet together when we pay attention to these things. And of course, Shawn Lucas, who is the Assistant Professor of Organic Agriculture at Kentucky State University and is responsible for some incredibly important research around regenerative agriculture here in the United States and beyond. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'd like to just start before we get right into some nitty gritty around regenerative agriculture. If we could just take a minute or two, each panelist, to talk about how you're feeling about regenerative agriculture, something you want to make sure folks know, and a little bit about what it is that you do. Could we start with you, Mr. Jeff Kostuk, tuning in from Canada?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Joy, for the warm introduction, and pleasure to be. I was hoping to be in Hempfest at some point in time. I really wish it was in person, but this works fine too on virtually. So, yeah, regenerative. I guess regenerative to me is obviously another, I guess, sort of buzzword that's quite important in agriculture all along. And so I think as we move forward as farmers and as agronomists, as which I am, those are things that are always first and foremost on our mind. Obviously, producers and farmers need to make money at the profession, but they need to take care of their baby and their grassroots, which is the land that we grow on. And so sustainability, regenerative agriculture, conservation, all of these terms basically just means babysitting what we're standing on and what provides our living for us, and then the great food that we're able to provide for everybody. So yeah, I guess my profession is an agronomist. I consider myself a applied research agronomist, and how we can better produce our food safer, continually, and more healthy for the people of the world, the better off we are as a society. So that's always been, I guess, first and foremost in my mind.
And I think one of the great perspectives that you'll be able to bring to this conversation, of course, you have this deep connection to the soil and understanding the delicate ecosystem that it is. And also you understand agriculture and the business of agriculture and the scale of it, and how can we put one foot in front of the other to apply some of these regenerative agriculture techniques to large-scale farming, because as much as we know hemp can empower the small farmer, and we want it to, and certainly the United States Congress wants it to empower the small and American farmer, there is going to be large-scale agriculture, and we have to find a way to make it healthy for the soil. We used to shout, of course, as you know, in the 90s, hemp is a miracle plant. It can grow anywhere. It doesn't take any inputs. It doesn't take any water. And I'm sure some spindly form of it will grow in the Sahara. But if we're talking about agriculture as an agricultural commodity, we're going to have to be more realistic and understand that it's actually a pretty hungry crop. Ms. Tonia Farman, please tell us a little bit about what's going on with Queen of Hearts Hemp and Hemp Northwest, and how you feel about regenerative agriculture.
Thanks, Joy. Well, I'll tell you, it's really tough on the consumer side because consumers are just learning about what organic means. And they don't really understand that there is a difference between organic and regenerative, and that organic agriculture isn't necessarily defined by ecological outcomes and really biodiversity, and really careful soil planning and all this. It's a very confusing topic to the consumer. And so what consumers look at that USDA organic label, and that's what they're looking for. And, we're trained as consumers to look for a logo or an icon. And it's so much more complicated than that, as you know. I mean, this is even I get confused, and I'm trying to really learn as much as I can so that I can educate retailers and wholesalers about the whole story, because it really is a very deep story. It's very connected. It has the outcomes, I think, with regenerative are much more driven on climate change and environment than organic. And not trying to reduce the importance of organic at all, but we have to really be clear from the farm all the way to the consumer what that means. And I just think that there's a lot of confusion right now around that. So what we try to do, and I hear the term of being the snowplow in the industry, which I prefer not to do, but I feel like sometimes we're doing that because we have to. We're in this moment in time where we have the opportunity to. There's a lot of focus on hemp. There's a lot of confusion on hemp. And so we have two parts of confusion. We have the organic regenerative confusion, and then people are still thinking that hemp is just CBD, or, so we have that side. So it really is being very clear about our communications, and that is with all of our customers. And then also, even some of the farmers don't really understand that. So I love to hear, Jeff talking about it from an agronomy side, because it really will come from the farmers. They have to believe and understand it before the consumer can. So.
Absolutely. Gosh, the perspective that you get out there, gal, it's amazing as Hemp Northwest and Queen of Hearts makes its way and also becomes leaders in education. It's incredible. So thank you for providing this perspective, and we'll learn more as we go on. Shawn Lucas, tell us some of the things that are going on for you in Kentucky and maybe some of your biggest concerns in regenerative agriculture right now.
Well, I've always come at soils. I'm a soil scientist by training. And so one of the things I've focused on throughout my career since I was a graduate student has been trying to use whatever tools we can as researchers, extension agents, and producers especially, to rebuild the soils that we've degraded and to maintain and enhance the soils that we are managing well, because when you do that, they're going to provide the functions that we want as humans. They're going to give us the crop yields we want. They're going to keep our water cleaner as they serve as a filter. And I think that's all part of regenerative agriculture. I think that, my primary focus, at least my title is organic agriculture specialist. And I think a well-run organic agriculture system really does reach up to some of those regenerative ideals, but we do have to really intentionally strive to be regenerative in our approach to agriculture. I think hemp can have a part in this. I agree that it's not a miracle crop. It's not going to save the world unless we use it appropriately as part of a bigger picture drive to do better in general in agriculture.
It's not in a vacuum, right? As I often say, how can we introduce this incredibly versatile, valuable plant with so much, potential for healing the soil and for healing the planet? We can't say that without also introducing regenerative agricultural techniques and other systems of responsibility and environmental permaculture throughout all of our systems, corporate, educational, legally, etc. And with that, let's start getting into some of the realities of the hemp crop. And I'll start with Jeffrey. Jeff, again, we were told or believed and then spread this misinformation throughout the late 80s and early 90s with the best of intentions that hemp doesn't take any input. And we know it's actually a hungry crop. Could you talk to us a little bit about those nutrient needs? And if you could, since we're looking for solutions here, a way that a small farmer could employ a regenerative agricultural technique with regard to those particularly nitrogen needs. That's the one that's the fertilizer or nutrient, I should say, that is the crop is the hungriest for. And then a large scale, let's talk a 15,000 acre farm versus a 10-acre farm. And one other thing that I just want to make sure that the viewers know, just as Tonia had said, hemp is, we've got oilseed crops, the grain, that beautiful nutrient dense seed. We've got fiber crops, the longest, strongest fiber in the world, which on the microscopic level has the most unique cellulosic makeup with strength and surface area second only to graphite whiskers and carbon nanotubes. And then of course, we've got the extract industry, and they all have their own issues in terms of agronomy. So grain and oilseed, fiber, and extract. Jeff is certainly experienced in all of these things, but particularly grain. So if we could look at it from that perspective, sir.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks again, Joy. So yeah, I guess that was a fairly big pet peeve of mine. I think that you often still read, whether it's on Twitter or looking through the internet, that hemp can be grown with very little to no fertilizer, and in some cases, there's claims that it says that it'll actually produce nitrogen, which again is kind of well, it is a false statement. It is not a legume. It's not does not produce. There are crops that will, and I think the important thing right off the get-go is that Mother Nature does not like a monoculture. Period. Although we farm predominantly year to year as a monoculture in the large part of things, if we continue to try to grow hemp on hemp on hemp on the same parcel of land, Mother Nature will kick our butts and just will not allow that. And so the reasons are plentiful, but we'll start with the fertility side of things. So as you mentioned, what we have found and what we did was analyze the hemp plant in a grain situation. It was a dual purpose variety. This would have been back in 2005. To determine what the nutrient uptake of that plant was, so that we had an idea how we could feed it properly. And we found that it would take about 200 units of nitrogen per acre to grow the uptake would be to grow a crop, which is fairly substantial. If you compared that with a wheat crop, wheat crops generally would be in that range of 130 to 150 pounds or units of nitrogen. A corn crop may need a little bit more. So just to give perspective is where it fits in the scope of other additional crops. Nitrogen we can grow with plants, and so not grow, but we can produce with plants. We can extract by using a crop that is a legume crop, a pulse crop in the grain side of things. We can have the plants work for us by extracting the nitrogen that's in the air and then delivering it into the soil for the next year's crops. So crop rotation is what we like to promote the most. And predominantly throughout the last, I would say 10 to 15, even longer, probably 20 years, we're looking at anywhere between a 3 to 4 year rotation before planting the same crop in the same field. What we like to try to do is have these pulse crops or these legume crops in that rotation, and preferably in front of preceding a crop that is a heavy nitrogen user. So we can put peas, we can put soybeans, we can put faba beans, which are very high nitrogen producing, to provide that extra nutrient. If we're on the organic side of things, then of course we still need to supplement likely with either some sort of an animal manure, but we can organically, we can do that. Conventionally, we use conventional fertilizers also to bump up what that crop is going to require. One of the biggest issues, there's two big issues, I guess, with regards to hemp that I'm concerned about, I guess. It is a high phosphate user too. It'll use about 50 units of phosphate per acre. We can't produce that phosphate. One of the benefits that hemp does provide, though, is that large taproot that can that can go deep into the soil and actually access some of the phosphate that other shallow rooted crops cannot. So it'll take that phosphate, put it into the plant structure, and bring it closer to the soil surface so additional crops can utilize that phosphate. The trick is to make sure that we make sure that we put that nutrient back into the soil that we are taking. So as an example, if we're taking a fiber crop and we take the crop and we cut it at a certain stage, remove it completely from the field, we're taking those nutrients and removing them somewhere else. We have to find a way that we can replace that, and it's called the nutrient cycle. And so it's all important that what I find we need to, and on the grain side of things also, and Joy, you've heard me say this many times, and it's my bigger joke that the nicest thing or the greatest thing about hemp is the strongest naturally occurring fiber in the world. The shittiest thing about hemp is it's the strongest naturally occurring fiber in the world when we want to try to incorporate all of that biomass back into the soil, because it just the nature of it and the air pockets and everything else, it tends to be difficult to work it back into the soil so that you can properly prepare a seedbed for the next year's crop. The next one on that list of nutrients is potassium, and potassium is immobile, but it can be leached out of the plant through moisture. And so on the grain side of things, we harvest the crop, we harvest the grain, as long as there's a certain period of time where there's rain or snow or what have you, to be able to wash those nutrients back into the soil. It's fabulous. We're only taking about 10 pounds of potassium off the field when we're harvesting grain only. The plant uptakes up to 200 pounds also, similar to nitrogen, of potassium. If we're removing a green biomass, we're removing up to 200 pounds of nitrogen, we're removing up to 200 pounds of potassium that we have to somehow get back into that soil. And so, again, by using certain crop rotations, making sure that we do as good a job as we can to replace those nutrients if we are harvesting in a method that is extracting them. So as we know, so the take-home story is, yeah, hemp does utilize a lot of nutrients. That's all part of its regenerative cycle, and making sure that we can actually put those nutrients back or allow the plant to release those nutrients by giving it time, and let Mother Nature do that for us too. So those are kind of I guess that would be the take home. And it doesn't, I touched on a little bit on grain fiber and even cannabinoid production. We're taking a lot of that plant material off when it's in a green state, drying it, whether we're hanging it in barns in Kentucky or running it through, mechanized dryers up here in Canada. It doesn't matter. We're still removing those nutrients. We have to be mindful of that as agronomists, as soil scientists, as consumers and producers. How do we make sure that cycle continues? And so,
well, there were a lot of takeaways there. So thank you. And certainly wanting to point out as well that as we can see, it's different needs to return to the soil based on what you're taking off the farm, and wanting to get in there too that, retting, which is for viewers who aren't familiar with the process, you could think of retting as rotting or the decomposing plant. So for for a fiber crop, we would generally ret that stalk. So, and they've discovered, now this wouldn't work maybe so well in Canada because it's already getting pretty cold by the time you're harvesting in Canada. And sometimes you may have already experienced a frost or two or more, as the case may be. Whereas in Kentucky, a more southern climate, it can be still very warm or humid and moist at harvest time. And so there have been some test research, and certainly Shawn will correct me if I'm wrong, where 87% of the nutrients that were uptaken from the crop were delivered back into the soil after field retting. So letting that crop after its harvest, but lay down swathed on the soil for about a week and again, it happened to be a very moist, warm week from what I understand, which very much lent itself to that decomposition, that breaking down of those lignans, those plant resins from the fiber bundles, and returning those nutrients. And Shawn, if we could go to you and anything that I may have misspoken there that you might want to fix for the viewers. And also if you could talk to us about cover crops, so that as we move more, continuing with this soil replenishment of nutrients, larger ag versus smaller ag.
So I'm jotting a note or two down here because there's a couple things I want to touch on, as we roll into my comment here. I did want to piggyback on what Jeff said. The nutrient uptake profile of this plant, it can have a very significant draw on phosphorus in particular, and one of the things that we focus on as we approach regenerative techniques in agriculture is not just biodiversity in terms of getting different plants rotated into our fields, but also thinking about maybe rotating some animals into our multi-year crop rotations. And when I'm not talking about hemp at KSU, that's one of the things that I've been focused on over the last 5 years. We have an integrated crop livestock rotation where we're looking at small ruminants on pasture with organic grains. It's a 5-year rotation with 2 years of organic corn and soybean, followed by 3 years of goats on pasture. And so, that manure that you would get from those animals will put some of that phosphorus back in the soil. And it also, you've got 3 years of undisturbed pasture with animals on there defecating and urinating. So you're adding nutrients, but you're also building carbon because you've got a very diverse profile of plants in your pasture that is going to be putting roots down, be putting biomass down with the addition of, animal byproducts, manure and urine. So that's going to help you build a much healthier soil going forward. And I think that anybody who really truly wants to approach things from a regenerative point of view needs to consider incorporating animals into their crop rotations, right? In terms of cover crops, that's also, at least where you can do it. I know in some climates it's too dry maybe for cover crops. I'm not sure what you guys get into up you're in Manitoba, Jeff? Yeah, I'm not sure what your window is for planting cover crops at the end of the year, but if you can do it, here in Kentucky, we're blessed that we're planting our cover crops probably next week or the week after. And we're able to, even in October, we get them in and get good biomass going through the fall. We like to do a rye vetch mix. Sometimes we do rye, vetch, and radish. There are some folks out there that are doing multi-species, multifunctional cover crops where they're planting 6, 8, 10 different varieties of plants, and each plant is targeted to address a different function, right? So it's really trying to hit that biodiversity in lots of different ways, trying to keep your soil covered to protect it from erosion, trying to trap those nutrients that may be in excess. In a really well dialed in system, you shouldn't have too much excess nutrient, but it happens, especially if if you got manure, or maybe you did bring in an off farm. Even in organic systems, we can bring in off farm inputs. And so if you've got excess in the soil, those cover crops can help trap those and keep them in your soil rather than allowing them to be leached out. Nitrate in particular is one that we have to think about. And so, when you're planting those cover crops, you're keeping those nutrients in the soil because they absorb them through the winter when you really don't have other things growing. And of course, you're going to get your carbon input out of that as well when you terminate that cover crop. What else did you ask me, Joy? I meant to write it down. I might have missed one.
No, you got it there, mister. And maybe if you could just help to explain for the beginning viewer here what a cover crop is and what the purpose of a cover crop is.
So, cover crops are multi-purpose crops. They are crops that, when you think of them as cover crop, you're thinking keep the soil covered to prevent erosion. But again, if you're really putting your cover crop together well, you can get nutrient input because you can have legumes incorporated into that cover crop, or you could plant deep-rooted plants in your cover crop that could potentially draw up nutrients from lower in the soil profile. And so you don't harvest a cover crop, you terminate it. You know, a conventional grower would use you know, an herbicide to spray it down. In organic systems, we either flail mow ours or we use a crimper roller to get a good mulch and allow that to naturally decompose. You're recycling all those nutrients, and you're recycling all that carbon that was collected out of the atmosphere and turning that into soil organic matter, which, as I tell all my students at Kentucky State, soil organic matter is the single most important soil factor that you can manage to build a healthy, high quality soil.
You can't just take and take and take from the soil and consider that it's especially if you're a commercial farmer, that's going to increase your yield over time, or increase the nutrient profile, or any number of characteristics that you are needing your crop to display for its end user or for the manufacturer with whom you're in a contract. It is unrealistic. We must continue to build the soil, and the stronger soil and the more healthy soil that we build, the better yield of the crop and the higher quality of the crop. It really is a win-win. And while I know some of these techniques are a hassle, and there can be an upfront investment, the return on that investment, sometimes in 3 years, sometimes in 8 years. But when you're talking about a several generation farmer wanting to create that as an income stream and a way of life for your family now, you must think 7 generations into the future, and so on and so forth. So thank you so much for that, Shawn. Miss Tonia, you have had the opportunity to travel, also to be aware of several different types of farms throughout the United States. You, obviously, Queen of Hearts Hemp, you're a grain person yourself, and from a long line of farmers, Miss Tonia Farman of Farman's Pickles. So could you tell us, particularly, I know you're aware of some dry land hemp grain farming that went on versus irrigated. Any stories that you want to share with us or could share with us about some of the farmers that you've met this particular growing season, growing more large scale than ever before, now that we're a legal agricultural commodity?
Yeah, it was a really exciting summer to be involved in growing grain, especially all in a very close proximity to each other. So we had fields, you know, within for us, an hour's drive of each other, to see, you know, different farming practices from the regenerative dry land, which is really interesting. Actually, they were all dry land, but one regenerative and the other was more traditional. And they, you know, they definitely reacted differently. I'm not going to lie and say that the regenerative was just like a rock star field. I mean, that definitely had some challenges. I think that you might have seen that field, Joy. So, you know, that was his first time doing hemp and regenerative. And, you know, it came from the farmer really believing and understanding what regenerative agriculture means, and really willing to invest into it. And then taking a chance on growing hemp grain. So he saw it as it's a rotational crop. And so, you know, what I think that we need to do is really get farmers that are already growing, like, you know, Shawn and Jeff said, they're all already have pulse crops or legumes and other grain crops, and they're rotating that hemp into it. It's not hey, just grow hemp. We really need to train the farmers on how hemp helps their current crop rotations and how it benefits and in the whole picture and the whole story. So yeah, that regenerative dry land was really inspiring. It had its challenges. It had a pretty good yield considering that it was his first year. But then we had our other dry land that was about an hour away in Walla Walla. And it was a better yield, but not by a landslide. And he didn't grow regenerative. So, you know, we're in experimentation phase right now.
For sure.
And, you know, we're trying to really get the academics and the researchers involved in this. And so we got Oregon State University's Global Hemp Innovation Center to be involved. and even Washington State University that collaborated. They're in that area. And it really, we wanted to get their interest, and we got their attention, and they were at the field when we first met. We had a big farmers meeting. We had to talk about everything from the end consumer and what kind of products this grain goes into, all the way to, the agronomy side from mostly wheat growers. These are mostly wheat growers. So the researchers were there for harvest. They were there post-harvest. They've been doing sampling. They've been taking testing. And to get them involved, I think, is so vital to this whole story. And then, sorry, I'm kind of diverting here a little bit.
Oh, no.
But, really it's also getting the other farmers in that area inspired and interested about what this is all about. Like, just come to the field and check it out, right? So we had a little educational meeting and talked about that too. So it's, we're all learning. I can't say that that this year was a rock star year, but that's why we're doing this. And it really is. I'm so inspired to hear Shawn talk about the details of, training his students, because that's kind of what I feel like we are all doing right now. And we really need to be doing. Consumers are not ready for this yet. It really has to start at the farm.
And even as you say, I'm diverting, I'm getting chills. I literally have goosebumps right now. I mean, this is a cooperative endeavor here, guys. We are all working together, researchers, stakeholders, farmers, lawmakers, regulators, to deliver on the promise of this crop. And what a blessing it was in so many ways that it was originally delivered to us in 2014 under agricultural pilot programs, because as we well know, throughout the globe, and even in Canada, Jeff could attest to, where they have been regulating the crop as a legal agricultural commodity with federal crop insurance since 1998. We're still very much in research phases here with our different climates, soil types, photo periods throughout the world. And again, the marketing and education that you do through Queen of Hearts Hemp and Hemp Northwest, and bringing these folks together through these commercial endeavors, just so important. And Shawn can attest, as being so involved with KSU. I mean, we are doing this together, one foot in front of the other, working together, and it's such a cooperative effort. I want to make sure I get to a few things in our remaining time. So I would like to hit you up, Jeffrey, with taproots and tillage, as we talk about building the organic material, the organic matter in the soil. We have some very unique taproots of the hemp plant that I'd like for you to discuss. And then if you could talk about basically, it's almost a no-till regime up there, and explain what tillage is. Although I like the way I explain it, so I'm just going to quickly say, picture a beautiful city with skyscrapers and monorails and everything's functioning wonderfully. And then a tornado comes into that city and it breaks up all of the buildings and the roads and the bridges, and it's a disaster. Think of a delicate ecosystem that is organic soil, or that is just soil in general, and then putting a till through it, tilling that soil, and how all of that beautiful ecosystem and soil structure that has been built and is working together to create nutrients and a vibrant, teeming life system. And now you've disrupted the entire thing. So with that, Jeffrey, talk to us about taproots and tillage, please.
Right, sure. So essentially, the nutrients that we know. So some are what are considered mobile nutrients, and they can move through the soil through positive and negative charges. Others are called immobile and need to be moved by other forms. So whether they adhere themselves to a soil particle or through moisture, and moisture is the one that we would talk about mostly with on the tillage side of things. So hemp having a taproot system, and Shawn mentioned having radish as another crop in a cover crop. What that does is that creates that huge macro pore in the soil where nutrients can start to go into the root zone better if we apply our fertilizer, our manure on the surface of the soil. Some of it will get eaten by microbes and other animals that go into the soil and sort of move those nutrients around. But primarily, it's either through wind or water that we are able to move those nutrients most efficiently and most quickly, I would say. So in the advent of, in the early 80s with reduced tillage, the idea there was to keep the soil on the where it's supposed to be in your land. You don't want it to go over to your neighbors. There was additional benefits that we found. Something like earthworms that started to build all of these channels, and they found that the earthworm populations under no-till situations just were going crazily good, and Dr. Dwayne Beck out of South Dakota was actually doing experiments where he was going to the bait shops in South Dakota and collecting all these earthworms and planting earthworms in his fields to simulate that too. So, he's been doing great work there, or had been doing, I think he's maybe retired now, for 20 some years on straight zero till or no till. What we do when we're tilling, and I'm not completely against tilling, because Mother Nature takes care of that too. When our bison, when we had millions of head of bison up on the plains here, and they walked through an area or stampeded through an area or ran through an area, there was a lot of tillage happening there in a much different way. So there are some benefits, but it has to be done properly. The tillage methods that we have currently is basically a shearing. So we have a shovel, it's called, or a implement where it's shaped like this, and it just cuts off those capillary tubes that we have through either root systems or these earthworms, and then the moisture isn't able to go down into where we can maintain it longer. So as we do that, if we do that too much, it pulverizes the soil, it moves. We've cut off that capillary action, as you say, like a tornado comes through and it's basically sort of leveled everything. And so I would suggest in the Canadian prairies now that we don't see summer fallow anymore, and we talked about this, and I think what we really have to do is again go back to what does Mother Nature do, and how is Mother Nature successful in making sure that everything is good. And you never see just bare ground, and you never just see that monoculture of one plant. So we need to be diverse. We need to be able to make sure that we protect that soil. And in doing so, that is regenerative agriculture.
And when I see as driving across the country, I only did that once during COVID this year, barren fields for miles and miles of just perfectly flat soil. And I just think to myself, how vulnerable that soil is, right, to the elements, to a hard rainstorm, and the disruption that it causes. And yet I also know that there's almost no way around it for certain types of agriculture. We've just got to learn to do better together. Shawn, if you could talk to us a little bit about pesticides, or breaking up the pest cycle by adding hemp to a rotation. Talk to us a bit about regenerative agriculture and hemp with pests and pesticides.
Well, being involved, in organic and thinking about things regeneratively, I think the most important thing you can do there is your crop rotation, right? There are multiple reasons to rotate crops. Some of that is to get, different nutrient feeding profiles coming out of the soil from the plants you're using, right? Using different plants that feed on different nutrients, but also, if you're doing it well, if you have a well-designed rotation, you should minimize disease impact and pest impact on your crops. The idea is not to eradicate, but to manage. And you have to think of it differently than a non-organic or non-regenerative farmer would think. The goal in most agriculture, from the producer's perspective, or even from the standard industrial consultant, or sort of some of my colleagues who have not had the background in organic or sustainable in extension, right? They might also have the goal of eradication or elimination. And you really have to look at the system, see how the system is functioning, see where your threshold is for economic damage, and make assessments based on that. You want to be able to tolerate some pest impact. And so rotating crops, or even, like I said, livestock, because if you really want to break up a disease cycle, if you go from annual plants to a 3-year or 5-year pasture with a completely different set of perennial plants in there, you're really breaking up the habitat for those pests. Those pests want to, target your crop. And by putting different crops or different situations like pasture into a rotation, you're breaking up those pest cycles, and at least minimizing the damage that they can do. The goal is not to be perfect. The goal is to minimize the damage.
And what are you finding for pests, different parts of the world, obviously for different reasons, whether it's moisture or climate? What are you seeing for pests in the hemp crop? And if you wouldn't mind telling us what type of hemp crop it's associated with, grain, fiber, extract, or dual?
Well, I can speak pretty well to what we're seeing here in the Southeast. Last year and this year as well, we've seen quite a bit of impact on crops grown for cannabinoid extraction from the corn earworm. And as an aside, while we're talking about this, I really love that Jeff is talking about, and you bring up the the taproot system on this plant. There's a lot of debate that happens between people that I know, particularly growing cannabinoid varieties, about whether we should go from seed or clone. And when you go from that clone, the analogy that I like to tell people is that you're growing an adult body with toddler legs. And you don't get that taproot that really does some of those functions that Jeff's talking about. But that aside, so we see a lot of corn earworm. We've had some aphid pressure, and again, that seems to be on cannabinoid varieties, and they come in on the clones, especially when we're getting clones from other parts of the country. There is a new bipolaris leaf spot that one of my colleagues here at University of Kentucky has identified, and it's a leaf spot that bipolaris typically only infects grains, but this particular strain has made the jump from grains to hemp, and it seems to not care whether it's cannabinoid, fiber, or grain. It can make the jump. So if you've got the right conditions, this bipolaris can make the jump, and that seems to cause a fair bit of trouble in the right environmental conditions. Last year we saw it, but we had a very dry fall and we didn't really see much impact. This year we're seeing a little more of it, and it's been a little more regular as far as moisture, and so it seems like it's having a little more impact. Of course,
is that the one that makes the leaves like curl up?
There are a couple different things that can make leaves curl up. I've seen the russet mite has been attributed to that, or that has been attributed to russet mite. It can be, there are some nutrient situations that can cause that. There might be some other infections that can cause that. And I'm not a disease specialist. I'm a crop and soils specialist. So, I'm going with what I've seen. Some of the other things that we've seen, particularly on our metabolite crops, our cannabinoid extraction crops, is in moist years we've had a lot of so-called bud rot, the botrytis, the gray mold that gets in there and causes problems. So we're looking at at KSU this year for the first time we played with an auto flower variety. It was about 45 days from start to finish, maybe a little longer than that. Direct seeded, and we planted it in late June, and we were harvesting it in August, and that's before the corn earworm had a chance to get in. You usually see the corn earworm in September, and so that's part of an organic or regenerative system too, is kind of knowing the pest life cycles and then finding ways to get around those pest life cycles. If you can plant yourself an auto flower that's not going to be flowering in September and October when the rest of your hemp around you is, you're one leg up on that pest.
The more we understand about nature and the systems affecting our crop, the more we can work with nature to make better crops with better yields and so on and so forth, and healthier soil. As I often say, without those top 6 inches of soil and rainfall, we'd all be dead. It is all about the soil, people. So thank you for that. Miss Tonia, I know that you are aware of some interesting pest situations that we had here in the United States this year. Anything that you might want to share with the listeners about that?
Well, yeah, so in Montana, we had locusts or grasshoppers, and it completely took out the grain field. And unfortunately, it was beautiful, beautiful 500 acres of organic and all of oilseed, right? So it just, those pests know what a good plant and a good seed tastes like, and they completely took it out. It was really sad. And Montana, as far as I know, got most of it. We didn't get any in Washington. So Washington factored fine. And right now, basically, they're looking at why was it isolated to the central, kind of north central plains of Montana. So, you know, and South Dakota, North Dakota, other surrounding states didn't get it. So that was really interesting. And just such a bummer because so many acres were planted in Montana of grain this year. And we were really excited about that. But, you know, there's so many unknowns right now with this plant. Why did we have such a fantastic yield in Washington on a dry land, which was just 5 miles away from another one? So, you know, the pest situation, the variables, there's so many variables. And that was painful to see. Yeah, it just broke my heart.
I saw the pictures, Gal, and it's really a great segue because I think part of the issue was, as explained by your hempster husband, Greg Nieko, is that all of the other crops had sort of were done, and then there were these fields of green, and the grasshoppers went right to the green and stripped down that green on those stalks, and unfortunately would eat to where then they just break the stalk and it would fall over. Well, in the same way that there was a field of green in that particular region with that particular convergence of circumstances, additionally, hemp is creating a new source of pollen for our pollinators. So when most of the pollen for traditional crops are already gone, now that we've reintroduced hemp here in the United States, it's actually all of a sudden creating pollen at a time when it has not traditionally, or in the last 80 years or so, since the 1937 Marijuana Tax Act, been available to pollinators. So on the one hand, as we see it as a source of green for some hungry pests, we also see it as a new source of pollen for pollinators. And it brings me so much hope and faith that we're going to, as long as we together continue to put one foot in front of the other, share what we're learning, share these research, continue to sing, dovetail, as we sing the song of hemp, that we sing the song of regenerative agriculture and responsibility and the larger vision to make the healthiest planet that we possibly can. Guys, I am so grateful, first of all, to Seattle Hempfest for giving us this wonderful platform to share this important information, and absolutely for your time, Tonia Farman, Jeff Kostuk, Shawn Lucas, my brothers and sisters, in delivering on the promise of hemp. Thank you so much for contributing today, for participating, and I can't wait till our next encounter.
And the land is dark.